June 5, 2023, 7 o'clock on a Monday morning in Pine Bluff, Texas, a town small enough that everyone knows their neighbor's business, or thinks they do. That morning, a call came into the county sheriff's dispatch center. The voice on the line belonged to Gladys Roberts, a 65-year-old elementary school teacher, church choir member and grandmother. Her voice was shaking. She reported that her twin grandsons, 21-year-old Jacob and Joseph Roberts, had vanished without a trace from their shared home on Cedar Lane. Within hours, volunteers flooded the streets. Church groups organized search parties. Local news vans lined the curbs. Neighbors scoured creeks, checked abandoned barns, knocked on doors. Everyone in Pine Bluff knew the Roberts twins, polite young men, inseparable since birth, raised by their grandmother after their parents were murdered in a home invasion nearly 2 decades earlier. The community had watched them grow up. They had rooted for them, and now they were gone. But as detectives began piecing together the timeline of that weekend, they uncovered inconsistencies that didn't add up. Surveillance footage showed movements Gladys never mentioned. Forensic evidence suggested something far darker than a disappearance. And when investigators finally unearthed the truth, it would shake the foundations of a town that prided itself on faith, family, and forgiveness. This is the story of Gladys Roberts, a woman who built her life on redemption and respectability, only to destroy everything she loved in a desperate attempt to protect a secret no one could have imagined. Before we go deeper, subscribe if you love true crime documentaries like this one, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Now let's go back to the beginning. To understand how a grandmother could become a killer, we have to travel back more than 6 decades to May 1958. When Gladys was born into a working-class family in rural Texas. Her father, Leon, worked maintenance at the county courthouse. Her mother, Martha, volunteered at the church kitchen and kept the family's reputation spotless. In towns like Pine Bluff, reputation wasn't just important, it was currency. It determined who got hired, who got invited to Sunday dinner, who got second chances. Gladys grew up in a world where appearances mattered more than almost anything else. She was the kind of child adults pointed to as an example. She brought home honor roll ribbons, sang in the youth choir, spoke softly and respectfully. Her parents bragged about her at potlucks. She was going to be the first in the family to attend college. That future seemed certain until Gladys turned 15. She met Andrew Cole, a 22-year-old road crew worker with charm that seemed permanent until you tried to hold on to it. They dated quietly for months. Movie nights, drives by the lake, promises whispered in the dark. When Gladys discovered she was pregnant, she told Andrew immediately. His reaction wasn't silence. It was panic. Within a week, he stopped returning her calls. When she went to the trailer where he lived, the landlord told her he'd packed up and left early that morning. No forwarding address, no explanation, just gone. Back at home, the news detonated like a bomb. Her father slammed the back door so hard the windows rattled. "You've shamed this family," he told her, pacing the kitchen while her mother cried into a towel. The church ladies who once praised her stopped making eye contact at Sunday service. That small-town air, the kind that always felt familiar, turned sharp with gossip. Whispers followed her everywhere, but Gladys refused to disappear. "I'm keeping this baby," she said through tears one night, and her mother finally nodded. "Then you stand tall doing it." In January 1973, she gave birth to a boy she named Brian Leon Roberts at the County Memorial Hospital. The nurses remembered how tightly she held him, whispering, "It's you and me now." She left the hospital with no father listed on the birth certificate and no plan other than survival. Her father's disappointment never fully faded, but he built a small crib from leftover wood and said little more about it. Money was threadbare. Gladys took a janitorial position at the elementary school, cleaning floors she'd once walked as a student. Each night, she'd rock Brian to sleep in their 1-bedroom rental, then sit at the table with community college textbooks open beside a bottle of instant coffee. She enrolled in evening classes for early childhood education, paying tuition in installments. A former co-worker, Shirley Moore, later recalled, "She'd come in dead tired, hair still wet from a quick shower, and start on homework. I never saw that woman quit anything." Through hard work and persistence, Gladys earned her associate degree and applied for a teacher's aide position. Her supervisors described her as precise and dependable, qualities that soon defined her entire reputation. Children liked her firmness. Parents trusted her to keep order. Within 2 years, she advanced to full-time teacher, one of the youngest at the school. Colleagues said she dressed neatly, spoke respectfully, and kept her personal life sealed shut. The rumor mill that once mocked her now called her a testament to grace. Faith became her anchor. She joined a neighborhood church, sang in the choir, led youth Bible study. The same congregation that once judged her now leaned on her. Pastor Dean Holloway remembered, "Gladys had a servant's heart. If we needed someone to organize food drives, she was there before sunrise." Her devotion, though genuine, carried an edge of performance, proof to the town and maybe to herself that the girl who fell from grace had climbed back up. Through the years, she lived with a kind of discipline that bordered on ritual. Wake at 5, breakfast for Brian, work, church, study, sleep. No men, no parties, no second chances for mistakes. When colleagues asked why she never dated, she'd laugh softly and say, "I already got my lesson early." The truth was more complicated. Every time she looked at her son, she remembered the day Andrew turned his back and vanished. That wound hardened into pride, and pride soon turned into control, the kind of control that built a spotless reputation but left no room for vulnerability. Years later, Gladys owned a small brick house on Cedar Lane, bought through years of savings and school district pay raises. She hung framed Bible verses in the hallway, lined up Brian's school photos along the mantel, filled the kitchen drawers with neatly labeled envelopes for bills. Her life looked orderly because it had to be. In a town like Pine Bluff, people didn't forget scandal. They just waited to see if you'd repeat it. Still, isolation followed her. Friends invited her to picnics. She declined. Colleagues celebrated birthdays. She stayed late grading papers. When a younger teacher teased, "Miss Roberts, you've got to live a little," she smiled and said, "Living quiet keeps you out of trouble." Underneath the joke was exhaustion, the kind that comes from holding everything together for too long. Brian was a curious, bright boy, the reason she kept moving. She worked double shifts during summer school, joined community tutoring programs, rarely let him out of sight. Every achievement of his, every certificate, every perfect attendance record was displayed like proof that her choices had been right. To anyone looking in, the story of Gladys Roberts was one of redemption. The teenage mother who became an educator, the sinner turned servant, the woman who refused to quit. But if you looked closer, there was something else. A quiet fear of being judged again, of letting one mistake destroy everything she had rebuilt. That fear lived under every decision she made, and years later, when detectives would trace the path of her life backward, they would see how early that fear took root, how it shaped her faith, her work, and every relationship she ever had. Brian Roberts grew into a young man who carried his mother's discipline like a badge of honor. Though he never knew his father, Gladys made sure her son never used that absence as an excuse. From the time he could walk, she taught him responsibility, cleaning up after himself, doing homework without reminders, showing respect to every adult who crossed his path. "If you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything," she would tell him, tapping her Bible for emphasis. There was no room for pampering, no bending the rules. Even when money was tight, Gladys made sure Brian understood that dignity was not something you bought. It was something you earned. By his teenage years, Brian had developed a quiet strength. Teachers described him as polite but focused. He was the kind of student who didn't need reminding to turn in assignments or apologize when he slipped. Friends admired how he could handle pressure without complaint. He was always calm, like he'd been through grown folks' problems early, one former classmate recalled years later. Those traits, forged under Gladys's careful eye, made him the kind of man people respected without question. He didn't talk much about his father, and when people asked, he simply said, "It's just me and Mom, and that's enough." At just 24 years old, Brian's life took a turn that neither he nor his mother could have predicted, but one that changed everything. In 1997, during a local community outreach organized by his church, Brian volunteered to help renovate a senior citizen center that had fallen into disrepair. That's where he met Elizabeth Moore, a young nursing student from Dallas who had joined the same mission group through her college ministry. She was confident, graceful, and spoke with a warmth that disarmed people instantly. When she laughed, people turned to look. She had a way of making ordinary moments feel lighter. Their first interaction was simple. Elizabeth offered him a bottle of water during a work break, joking, "You look like you're about to pass out, Mr. Hardworker." He grinned shyly and replied, "Guess I'm just trying to keep up with you." That exchange sparked an easy friendship that grew quickly. Over the following weeks, they often stayed back after the volunteer shifts ended, talking about everything from faith to family to the kind of life they wanted someday. Brian admired her compassion. Elizabeth admired his steadiness. "You listen," she once told him, "and that's rare these days." By 1998, their friendship had quietly evolved into something deeper. They weren't flashy, no public displays, no grand gestures, just two people who found peace in each other's company. Gladys noticed the change in her son before he ever said a word. "You've got that look," she teased one evening. Brian smiled, shaking his head. "She's different, Mom. She's kind." Gladys, cautious from years of protecting what she'd built, replied softly, "Kind is good, but kindness needs foundation." Still, when she finally met Elizabeth, her skepticism melted. Elizabeth called her Mrs. Roberts the first few times, but Gladys quickly corrected her. "Just call me Gladys, honey. Family don't need titles." The church community saw the relationship as a natural fit. Both came from faith-driven upbringings. Both had reputations for humility. Both shared a quiet ambition that made them seem older than their years. When they announced their engagement in late 1998, the congregation was thrilled. The wedding took place the following spring, decorated with modest white roses and a borrowed piano melody played by a friend. Pastor Holloway officiated, reminding them during the vows, "Marriage isn't about perfection, it's about endurance." Gladys sat in the front pew, her eyes filled with tears that mixed pride with disbelief. The girl once whispered about now watched her son take a woman's hand in marriage, surrounded by people who had once judged her. It was a full-circle moment. The early years of their marriage were simple, even modest, but full of genuine affection. Brian worked as a logistics assistant for the school district, while Elizabeth completed her nursing license at the county hospital. They rented a small duplex not far from Gladys's home. Most evenings, the smell of Elizabeth's cooking drifted down the street, and Gladys often stopped by with casseroles, advice, and the occasional unsolicited checklist. "Don't overwork yourself, Liz," she'd say. "A good wife rests too." Elizabeth would laugh. "Yes, ma'am," and continue stirring. The two women grew close, more mother and daughter than in-laws. Brian and Elizabeth balanced each other perfectly. Where he was calm and methodical, she was expressive and curious. He liked routine, she liked conversation. Friends described them as steady, a couple who still prayed before meals and shared everything openly. They never had much, but they never seemed to need more than what they had. One of their neighbors later recalled, "You could tell they were happy, the kind of happy that don't shout, it just sits quiet and steady." In July 2001, Elizabeth found out she was pregnant. She told Brian in the parking lot of the church where they'd first met. "You're going to be a dad," she whispered, handing him the test with trembling hands. Brian froze, his smile wide and disbelieving. That night, they drove straight to Gladys's house. When she opened the door, Elizabeth blurted it out, "You're going to be a grandma." For a moment, Gladys stood still, hand covering her mouth. Then she laughed, tears rolling down her cheeks. "Double blessings," she said when the doctor later revealed they were expecting twins. In April 2002, twin boys, Jacob and Joseph Roberts, were born healthy and strong, both identical. Brian stayed by Elizabeth's side through the entire 30-hour labor, holding her hand as she cried and joked, "Next time we're adopting." Gladys was in the waiting room, pacing and praying aloud. When the nurse finally carried the babies out to meet her, she whispered, "Lord, you've redeemed everything I ever lost." Those first years were a blur of baby bottles, sleepless nights, and soft hymns sung in rocking chairs. Gladys became a daily presence, cooking meals, folding laundry, taking midnight shifts so the young couple could rest. "Go sleep," she'd wave them away. "Grandma's got them." Elizabeth trusted her completely, often telling Brian, "Your mother loves these boys like they're her second chance." Gladys smiled at that comment, but it carried a deeper truth than Elizabeth could have known. Just a few years later, the Roberts family had fallen into a steady rhythm. Church on Sundays, park trips on Saturdays, dinner at Gladys's every Wednesday. The twins were inseparable. Jacob curious and talkative, Joseph quiet and protective. Family photos from those years show pure joy. Birthday candles, picnic blankets, holiday sweaters. To anyone looking in, the Roberts family was everything Gladys had prayed for. Whole, loving, blessed. But what no one could see was that beneath all the harmony, a silent dependence had begun to take shape. Gladys's presence was constant, her influence firm. She called daily, visited often, made herself indispensable in ways both loving and controlling. For now, no one questioned it. After all, she was family, the glue holding them together. But in 2005, the Roberts family was hit by a disaster no one saw coming. It all began on the evening of October 14th, a Friday like any other. Earlier that morning, Brian left home for work. His co-workers later recalled that he seemed cheerful that day, excited about the weekend, planning to take Elizabeth and the twins out to the new park that had just opened downtown. Elizabeth, who had the day off from her shift at the hospital, spent the morning with the boys, Jacob and Joseph, now 3 years old, baking cookies and packing away their toys. To everyone who knew them, the Roberts family was ordinary, content, and safe. But that night would end in a way no one could have imagined. According to police records from the county sheriff's department, a 911 call came in at 9:42 p.m. A neighbor, Angela Dunn, reported hearing what she described as a loud bang, like wood cracking, and then glass shattering. Officers arrived at 9:58 p.m. The front door of the Roberts residence was ajar. Inside, the lights were still on, and there were signs of chaos. Drawers pulled open, furniture shifted, broken picture frames scattered across the hallway. In the living room, Elizabeth Roberts was found collapsed near the couch with a gunshot wound to her chest. In the master bedroom, Brian was discovered face down beside the bed, a single gunshot to the back of the head. Their twin boys were found asleep in the next room, unharmed but crying from the noise. Detective Haynes, who led the initial response, later told local reporters, "It looked like a robbery that went wrong, but something about it felt too targeted. They didn't take everything, only certain items." Among the missing valuables were Brian's wallet, Elizabeth's jewelry box, and a small lockbox that contained family documents and around $2,000 in cash, money the couple had been saving for the boys' preschool tuition. There were no clear fingerprints on the door or windows and no forced entry marks. Investigators believed the suspect might have entered through the back door, which had been left unlocked, a common habit in small-town Texas communities where trust was second nature. In the days that followed, the quiet town was consumed by grief and disbelief. The Roberts family had been admired by nearly everyone. Pastor Dean Holloway described Brian as a husband who lived by example, and Elizabeth as the kind of nurse who prayed for her patients even when they couldn't hear her. At the candlelight vigil held outside their home 3 days later, nearly 400 people gathered. Gladys stood near the front holding a framed photo of her son and daughter-in-law, tears staining her cheeks. When asked by a reporter, she simply said, "My boy loved his family. Whoever did this, they didn't just kill them, they killed a part of me too." The police investigation stretched into months. Dozens of interviews were conducted. Neighbors, co-workers, friends, even delivery drivers who had been in the area that day. There were initial leads. A dark SUV spotted driving down Route 16 shortly after 9 p.m. and a pawn shop where one of Elizabeth's bracelets was allegedly sold weeks later. But nothing solid held up in court. The shop owner couldn't recall who sold it. The surveillance cameras were outdated, grainy, beyond use. Evidence sat in a case file marked Roberts Homicide Active. Detectives also explored the possibility of a personal motive, but Brian and Elizabeth had no known enemies, no debts, no affairs, no history of domestic conflict. Brian's boss at the district office told investigators he was reliable, steady. If something was wrong, he'd have said something. Elizabeth's co-workers echoed the same sentiment. They were the couple everyone admired, the ones who never raised their voices in public, the ones who always seemed to have life figured out. By March 2006, the case hit a dead end. With no suspects and no confessions, it was officially classified as an unsolved double homicide, though detectives kept it open for review. The only constant was Gladys's quiet presence at the police department every month, asking if there was any new information. "Ma'am," Detective Haynes told her once, "we haven't given up. We're just waiting for the break that hasn't come yet." In the aftermath of the murders, Gladys's life changed overnight. She went from proud grandmother to sole guardian of 2 toddlers. With Elizabeth being an orphan and Brian an only child, the court system moved swiftly. On June 2, 2006, Judge Ruth Ellison of the Pine Bluff County Court granted Gladys permanent guardianship of Jacob and Joseph Roberts. She signed the papers with trembling hands, telling the clerk, "They're all I have left." Her petition included statements from family, friends, and church members who vouched for her stability and moral standing. The court documents described her as a woman of strong faith, proven resilience, and unquestioned responsibility. After the legal process, there were practical battles to fight. She met with estate lawyers to settle the couple's mortgage and insurance policies. Survivor benefits were processed through Elizabeth's hospital and Brian's employment at the school district. The twins' future, financially and emotionally, depended on Gladys now. Friends from church organized meal trains and offered childcare help, but she refused most offers. "They're my boys," she'd say. "I'll raise them just like I raised Brian." And she meant it. By late 2006, she moved the twins into her home on Cedar Lane, repainting the spare bedroom and filling it with new toys. Every night, she read them stories about heroes and angels, often whispering, "Your mommy and daddy are watching you." At the church, people spoke softly around her, offering condolences mixed with awe. "That woman's been through enough for 3 lifetimes," one congregant told the local paper. Yet she's still standing. For the next several years, the Roberts murders became a ghost story that haunted Pine Bluff. Children grew up hearing whispers about the couple who never saw it coming. Detectives revisited the file twice, once in 2009 after a tip about a traveling burglary crew, and again in 2013 when DNA databases became more advanced. Each time the results were the same, inconclusive. The killers were never found. One might think that since Gladys had grown older, she might not have the strength or patience to raise 2 young boys the way she once raised her son. But that was never the case. In fact, those who knew her said she became even more determined. After the deaths of Brian and Elizabeth in 2005, the twins Jacob and Joseph became her reason to keep living. She often said, "God took my child, but he left me his heart ×2. Gladys poured everything into them, her time, her energy, and what little money she had left. Raising 2 children wasn't easy for a woman in her 40s, working part-time at an elementary school, but she refused to let grief or exhaustion win. The neighbors on Cedar Lane often saw her up early, sweeping her porch, packing lunchboxes, making sure the boys' uniforms were spotless. She believed discipline and order were the antidote to chaos. Inside the Roberts household, structure wasn't just encouraged, it was law. Schoolwork came before television, chores before play. Every Saturday morning, she lined the boys up at the kitchen table with a list written in her neat cursive: "Sweep the porch, clean your shoes, fold your clothes, read a chapter of Proverbs." Sunday meant church, no exceptions. Even when the twins complained about waking up early, she'd call out from the kitchen, "If you can wake up for cartoons, you can wake up for the Lord." Jacob was the quieter of the 2, thoughtful, curious, always asking questions about how things worked. He loved reading, taking apart old radios, watching documentaries with his grandmother. Joseph, on the other hand, was outgoing and full of energy. He loved sports, made friends easily, had a laugh that could fill the house. Together they balanced each other out, and to the community they were inseparable. The Roberts twins everyone adored. By all accounts, the boys were properly cared for. Despite living modestly, Gladys kept them fed, clothed, and educated. When bills piled up, she found extra work tutoring kids from church or selling baked goods at community events. Her faith community rallied around her, calling her an example of resilience. "That woman has been through more than most, And she's still standing tall, Pastor Holloway said. At every school function, Gladys sat in the front row, cheering, as if the twins were her own children all over again. She celebrated their birthdays with small cakes she baked herself and second-hand toys wrapped carefully in newspaper. For Jacob and Joseph, it was never about what they didn't have. It was about what they did, a home filled with love and consistency. As the twins reached adolescence, their personalities started to widen apart. Jacob leaned toward academics and spent hours in his room drawing or reading. Teachers described him as brilliant but reserved. He joined the science club and dreamed of becoming an engineer. Joseph, meanwhile, became a local favorite on the basketball court. Coaches saw potential in him and encouraged him to try out for the high school team. Gladys supported both, but made sure they understood her rules came first. You can have dreams, she told them, but discipline will get you there. The teenage years came with new challenges. Between school, sports, and the natural desire for independence, the twins began to push boundaries. Joseph's outgoing nature led him to spend more time with friends, while Jacob often stayed home focused on schoolwork or helping his grandmother. When Joseph missed curfew one night at 17, Gladys waited by the door until he came home. "You think I'm mad?" she said, her voice trembling. "I'm scared I can't lose you boys like I lost your daddy." Joseph didn't argue. He hugged her, muttering, "I know, Grandma. I'm sorry." Despite the occasional friction, their bond remained strong. The boys never forgot how much Gladys had sacrificed. On Mother's Day in 2016, they surprised her with a handwritten card that read, "You're not just our grandma, you're our everything." She kept it folded in her Bible for years. At church, people admired her parenting. "Those twins are growing into fine young men," one deaconess remarked. "Gladys raised them right." To everyone around, the Roberts household was proof that love could rebuild what tragedy had broken. By the time the twins turned 18, their lives seemed filled with possibility. Jacob earned a small scholarship to a technical college nearby, while Joseph was offered a position as an assistant coach for the Youth Basketball League. The town of Pine Bluff celebrated their success, seeing them as a symbol of hope, a second generation rising above hardship. Gladys's pride was evident. She told a neighbor, "My Brian would have been proud. They've done everything I prayed for." But that pride came with a quiet fear she never voiced out loud, the fear of being left behind. She had spent so many years defining herself through motherhood and caretaking that she didn't know who she would be without them. Still, she masked that fear well. The twins adored her and included her in nearly everything they did: family dinners, Sunday services, even weekend outings. It wasn't unusual to see all three of them walking through town together, laughing and teasing each other. People often said, "You'd think those boys were her sons, not grandsons." And in every sense, they were. She had raised them from their first steps to their first jobs. Her home was their home, but time was moving fast. As they crossed into adulthood, the twins' world began to expand beyond Gladys's careful control. They were making friends she didn't know, keeping secrets she wasn't part of, talking about futures that might take them away from Pine Bluff. Gladys smiled when they spoke about it, but her mind raced. She couldn't bear the thought of being alone again. By all accounts, life seemed well. Even when COVID-19 hit the United States in 2020, Gladys and her boys managed to stay safe and close. While the rest of the country was consumed with lockdowns, panic, and loss, their small home on Cedar Lane became a safe haven, a place untouched by the chaos outside. They cooked together, prayed together, laughed through nights when the power flickered and the world felt uncertain. Gladys often told friends, "We've lost enough already. God won't take any more from me." She meant it. For her, Jacob and Joseph weren't just grandsons. They were her redemption, the reason she still believed in purpose. The years that followed were steady. The twins graduated high school, started small jobs around town, became known as the Roberts boys. Good kids, respectful, the kind everyone rooted for. But 2023 would be different. That spring, Gladys began preparing for something she had been waiting on for years, the twins' 21st birthday, April 14th. She talked about it for weeks, telling anyone who'd listen that it was the biggest day of their lives. To her, 18 didn't mean adulthood. 21 did. It meant they were men now, capable of standing on their own 2 feet. "They've carried my last name through storms," she told her pastor one Sunday after service. "Now I want to celebrate the men they've become." She made lists, food, decorations, drinks, and insisted everything had to be perfect. Neighbors saw her shopping days before, smiling in a way she hadn't since her son's death. "This one's special," she told the cashier at Pine Bluff Market. "It's for my boys." Gladys invited everyone who mattered, family, friends, church members, and a few of the twins' co-workers from the local auto shop and grocery store. She spent the night before baking banana pudding and frosting a homemade cake with their names written in blue icing. On the morning of April 14th, the smell of ribs and cornbread filled the neighborhood. By 6 in the evening, her backyard was glowing with string lights and laughter. A banner stretched across the fence read, "Happy 21st, Jacob and Joseph." Guests clapped when the twins came out wearing matching shirts and ball caps, their smiles wide and genuine. To everyone, they looked like success stories, young men who had beaten tragedy and grown into promise. Gladys, dressed in a soft floral dress, stood between them and said, "My babies are men now. The Lord truly kept his promise." There was food, music, endless laughter. The atmosphere was light and warm, the kind that made people forget how small the town was or how heavy life could be. "You could feel the joy in that yard," one neighbor later recalled. Gladys was just glowing. You'd never know that woman had seen so much pain. The twins helped serve food and passed around drinks while Gladys moved through the crowd thanking people for coming. But unlike other celebrations, this one carried a quiet sense of indulgence. On the dining table next to the fruit punch and soda stood several bottles of whiskey and a few 6-packs of beer. For most people it was nothing unusual, but for those who knew Gladys's strong faith it was surprising. She had always preached temperance, yet here she was, telling a group of guests it's their first legal drink. One night won't hurt. The twins were thrilled. It was the first time they had ever seen their grandmother drink openly. "Come on, Grandma, have a toast," Joseph said, grinning as he handed her a glass. Gladys hesitated, laughing nervously. "Just one sip," she said. But one sip turned into 2. Jacob poured another round. "You raised us right," he told her, his voice steady but playful. "You deserve to relax for once." Gladys lifted her glass again, shaking her head. "Y'all are going to make me sin in my own house," she said, laughing. The group around them joined in the laughter, clinking glasses, cheering for the twins. No one knew how quickly the night would change once the crowd was gone. As the hours passed, the backyard slowly emptied. Around 11, the music softened and the last of the guests began to leave. A few neighbors waved from the sidewalk as they carried leftovers and goodie bags. "We'll see you Sunday, Miss Roberts," one said. "Don't stay up too late." By midnight, the celebration was over, at least for everyone else. Inside, the house still smelled of barbecue and bourbon. The table was cluttered with half-empty bottles and plates. Jacob slouched on the couch, laughing at something on his phone, while Joseph danced poorly to the fading song from a Bluetooth speaker. Gladys sat nearby, tired but smiling. Her cheeks were flushed and her eyes glistened. "You two are everything I ever prayed for," she said softly. "Everything I lost came back through you." The twins smiled, drunk but sentimental. "You did good, Grandma," Jacob said. "You raised us right." "You really did." Joseph leaned over, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "Best night ever," he added. It was a moment of love, innocent, heavy with gratitude, but also vulnerable. The drinks kept flowing. The room felt warmer, quieter. A song played softly in the background, and their laughter began to fade into silence. Gladys spoke again, her voice lower this time. "You know, your daddy laughed just like you, Joseph. Same eyes too. He was so proud the day you were born." Her words trembled. Jacob nodded, eyes heavy from drink. "Wish he was here," he muttered. "Wish Mom was too." Gladys looked at him, her lips trembling. "They are," she whispered. "They're right here." The silence stretched, only the faint hum of the refrigerator filling the room. What happened next remains deeply contested. According to the subsequent investigation, boundaries that had always existed in that household, boundaries of appropriate familial love, were crossed that night. Investigators would later describe it as a collapse of judgment fueled by intoxication, grief, and decades of emotional enmeshment. No clear timeline was ever established for the events of that evening, and much of what occurred was pieced together from forensic evidence and Gladys's own fragmented statements weeks later. What is known is this. By the early hours of April 15th, something irreversible had taken place. The light stayed dim, the music played softly, and outside, the street was silent. The neighbors slept, never imagining that inside that tidy home, the same house where Faith had once been the anchor of 3 lives, something had fundamentally broken. Just weeks later, Gladys noticed something she couldn't ignore. Her period, which had always been as regular as clockwork, never came. At first, she convinced herself it was nothing more than menopause creeping up on her. After all, she was 65, and her body had already been through so much. But when the first week of May passed and there was still no sign, she couldn't push it aside any longer. Her mind raced. It wasn't just the missed period. It was the nausea, the bloating, the dizziness that seemed to come out of nowhere, the exhaustion that settled into her bones. Something was wrong, or perhaps something was very right, and she couldn't bring herself to believe it. She waited a few more days before buying the pregnancy test. At first, she hesitated. The very idea felt impossible, like something out of a twisted dream. A woman her age, pregnant. It couldn't be. But Gladys had always been a woman of faith, a woman who believed in miracles. She knew what she had to do. She bought the test, drove back home, and locked herself in the bathroom. After a few moments of silence, the faint pink lines on the stick said it all. Positive. Gladys sat down on the edge of the tub, staring at the test, as if it would change its answer if she looked at it long enough. Her heart raced. She pressed the test into the trash can, covering it with old tissues, praying that it wasn't true, but deep down, knowing it was. That night, she went to bed early, the weight of the discovery pressing on her chest. She didn't speak to the boys, didn't say a word to anyone. For days she said nothing, waiting, hoping the symptoms would go away, that her body would simply reset. But it didn't. The nausea worsened. By mid-May, she couldn't ignore it anymore. She had to tell someone. It was Jacob who found it. In the trash, buried beneath scraps of paper, was the test, discarded and forgotten by Gladys, who had hoped the evidence of her situation would just disappear. Jacob stared at it for a long time, his pulse quickening as he recognized what it was. He didn't need to ask what it meant. He rushed to find Joseph. "Joe," he said, his voice shaking, "look what I found." Joseph, who had been playing video games in the next room, turned to face his brother. He could see the panic in his eyes, the dread written all over his face. Jacob placed the pregnancy test on the table in front of him, the 2 bright pink lines glaring back at them. This is from that night, right?" Jacob asked, his voice low. Joseph didn't answer at first. He just stared at the test, trying to process it, to make sense of it all. "It can't be," he muttered. "It just can't be. Grandma, she's not..." But the words didn't make sense anymore. They were both thinking the same thing, but neither of them could put it into words. Finally, Jacob exhaled, a deep breath that seemed to shake the walls. "It has to be from that night. It's the only time. It makes sense. We were all drinking. And she didn't stop us. She drank too. Hell, she even made us drink with her." Joseph, still silent, looked at his brother, his face a mixture of anger and confusion. "So what now?" His voice was steady, but the fear behind it was palpable. They had been raised by Gladys to believe in discipline, in faith, in right and wrong. But this was beyond what either of them had ever imagined. Jacob rubbed his forehead, pacing back and forth. "I don't know," he finally muttered. "We can't just let her keep it. You know what would happen if anyone found out." Joseph nodded, the weight of the decision hanging in the air between them. "We have to tell her she has to get rid of it. She has to," he said firmly. He was the more outgoing of the two, the one who had always taken charge. But the idea of confronting their grandmother on something so wrong, it felt impossible. But they both knew it was the only way. They had to stop her from making a decision that could tear apart the family and ruin everything they had built together. That night, Gladys didn't sleep. The reality of what was happening inside her felt like a storm she couldn't escape. She hadn't told the boys yet, but she knew the moment was coming. They'd find out, just like she'd always known they would. She wasn't sure how to face them, how to explain something so personal, so monumental. The fear of being judged, the fear of losing their respect, the fear of the community knowing, it weighed heavily on her chest. By the next morning, it was clear there was no avoiding the conversation. Jacob and Joseph had been avoiding her, both knowing something wasn't right. As she prepared breakfast, she could feel their eyes on her, especially Jacob's. Finally, as the sound of silverware clinked on the table, Jacob spoke. "Grandma, we need to talk." Gladys looked up from the stove, her heart pounding in her chest. "What about?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Jacob placed the pregnancy test on the table, its 2 lines burning into her. Gladys felt her blood run cold as she looked at it, the reality sinking in. "What is this?" Jacob asked, his voice barely above a whisper. For a moment, Gladys said nothing. The room felt like it was closing in on her. Then she whispered, "I didn't want you to find out this way. I didn't want anyone to know, but I can't deny it anymore. I'm pregnant." There was a long silence. Jacob and Joseph looked at each other, stunned and speechless. Joseph finally spoke, his voice a mixture of fear and confusion. "How is that even possible, Grandma? You're 65. "I don't know how, Joseph. It's a miracle," Gladys replied softly, her hands shaking. "But it's happening and I'm keeping the baby. This is God's plan." Jacob slammed his fist on the table, his face twisted in frustration. "You can't keep it. Do you know what will happen if anyone finds out? Do you know what people will say? You'll destroy everything we've built." Gladys's heart ached as she heard the words she feared most. The boys weren't just shocked. They were scared. Scared of her. She looked at them both, her voice shaking. "I can't. I took care of you boys all these years and then just throw everything away. This baby, this is a gift. It's a second chance for me." But the twins weren't convinced. They both stood up, the tension between them and their grandmother growing. "We can't let you keep it, Grandma," Jacob said. "We can't. You have to get rid of it." Gladys's face hardened. "I won't," she whispered. "I'm keeping this child no matter what." And just like that, the air shifted in the Roberts household. The unity that had once held them so tightly together, the faith, the love, the pride, fractured. The stakes were too high now. There was no going back. The days that followed the twins' discovery of the pregnancy test were anything but comforting. The tension in the Roberts home was palpable. The once peaceful house where laughter and shared meals had defined the rhythm of life was now marked by silence. Jacob and Joseph, no longer the children who looked up to their grandmother with trust, were increasingly distant. They refused to speak to her, avoided eye contact, spent more time out of the house. Gladys, ever the protector, knew that things were unraveling. She had spent years building a reputation as a devoted mother and grandmother, and now, in a moment of fear and desperation, it felt like it could all come crashing down. She hadn't raised her boys, her grandchildren, to betray her, to expose her weaknesses. But in their eyes, she saw the distance growing, the distrust settling in, the threat of public humiliation. The community gossip she had once controlled so carefully was now her greatest fear. Gladys knew what she had to do, though she couldn't bring herself to say the words. Every meal felt awkward. The twins barely ate, picking at their food without saying a word. Gladys, who had once been the center of their world, now felt like a stranger in her own home. The longer she allowed the silence to hang, the more anxious she became. Each day, as the twins left for their part-time jobs or went out with friends, she felt a gnawing sense of urgency. What if they told someone? What if they decided to act before she could get a handle on the situation? The thought of losing control over her life and their lives kept her awake at night. What if they went to the authorities? What if the whole town found out? The boys, meanwhile, were grappling with their own confusion, their own guilt, their own fear. Their conversations were always heated, full of frustration and confusion, but neither of them knew how to fix what had already been done. Gladys overheard bits and pieces of these exchanges, her heart sinking deeper with each passing day. Gladys didn't know how to turn back the clock, didn't know how to undo the irreversible mistake she had made, but she knew she couldn't afford to wait any longer. The fear that consumed her, fear of exposure, fear of loss, fear of the community turning against her, grew every day. It was in her every thought, every glance she exchanged with the twins. She was being watched. They were watching her. According to the subsequent investigation, what happened next was calculated and deliberate. On the evening of June 4th, 2023, a Sunday, Gladys prepared a meal. She made one of their favorites, macaroni and cheese, baked chicken, green beans. She added something extra this time. Investigators would later find evidence that she had obtained a prescription sedative, likely from her own medicine cabinet, left over from a dental procedure years earlier, and mixed it into glasses of sweet tea she served to the twins. It wasn't much, just enough to make them drowsy, to dull the sharp edges of their anxiety. She mixed it in quietly, waiting until they were seated at the table, quietly talking about the new job they had gotten together. She smiled, offering them their glasses. "Drink up, boys, it's a special night and you've earned it." She raised her glass, watching them both drink in silence. The night carried on as it always had, but underneath it something shifted. As the minutes ticked by, the effects of the sedative began to show. Jacob, usually the more alert of the two, began to slouch in his chair, his words slowing as his head dropped. Joseph followed soon after, his eyes glazed over, his laughter heavy but distant. Gladys watched them, making sure the substance worked. She had to act fast. She could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on her chest. She had taken control of their bodies. Now she needed to control their fate. Hours later, as the house fell silent, Gladys knew the time had come. The twins were barely conscious, their heads resting on the table, their breathing shallow. Gladys stood up, her heart racing. This was the point of no return. Forensic evidence later showed that Gladys administered a lethal dose of pesticide, a common agricultural chemical available at most hardware stores in rural Texas, to both twins while they were incapacitated. Toxicology reports confirmed the presence of both the sedative and the pesticide in their systems. She carefully moved them, each step calculated and deliberate, as she carried them toward the back door, where she had already prepared her vehicle. She placed them in the back seat of her car, taking one last glance at the house that once felt like a sanctuary. She knew that everything she had worked for, every sacrifice she had made, could now unravel. But in her mind, there was no turning back. As the early morning light began to creep over the horizon, Gladys drove through the quiet streets. The world was asleep, unaware of what was unfolding just beyond the town's borders. She took a small, winding road into the woods, far from prying eyes. The area was secluded, the earth soft and forgiving for someone in a hurry. She pulled the car to a stop, took the twins out, and with trembling hands began digging. She didn't look at their faces. She couldn't. They were still her boys in some way, still the children she had raised, but now they had become something else entirely. The grave was shallow, hastily done, but it was done. The night was almost over, and so was the life she had tried so hard to build. She placed the twins' bodies in the grave, covering them with dirt, her hands moving faster than she could think. Afterward, she wiped her hands on her dress, breathing heavily, trying to steady herself. When she returned to the house, there was no sign that anything had changed. She cleaned up the kitchen, disposed of the contaminated glasses, changed into fresh clothes. As the sun began to rise, she rehearsed the story in her mind. She knew what she had to do. She had to play the grieving grandmother. She had to play the part of the devastated woman whose family had been torn apart. And she would do it well. No one would suspect her. The following day at 7 a.m., she made the call. "This is Gladys Roberts," she said into the phone. "I need to report my grandsons missing. They went out last night and I haven't seen them since." She could hear the dispatcher's calm voice on the other end of the line asking the usual questions. "When was the last time you saw them? Do you know where they might be?" Gladys answered each one with the practiced ease of someone who had rehearsed this moment in her mind for hours. To the outside world, Gladys Roberts played the role of the grieving grandmother to perfection. As soon as her grandsons, Jacob and Joseph, were reported missing, she immediately took to the streets, to the police, and to the media, crying for their return. "Please, whoever took them should bring them back," she sobbed in front of the cameras, clutching the last pictures of the boys she had taken just the day before. To everyone watching, her performance was heartbreaking, genuine in its despair. But to the detectives investigating the case, something didn't add up. The timeline she provided just didn't match the evidence. She claimed that the twins had simply disappeared after she had gone to bed, but the details of her story were vague. She was too dramatic, too over the top. The more they dug into her statements, the more they realized the holes in her account. Detectives were already on high alert. They began monitoring her movements without her knowledge, looking for any clues that would lead them to the truth. The inconsistencies between what Gladys said and what the evidence showed were starting to build a case against her, but they didn't have enough yet. They needed more proof, something concrete to bring her in. That's when they made a breakthrough. Just 1 week after Jacob and Joseph had gone missing, investigators noticed something strange on the surveillance footage. At around 1 a.m. on the morning of June 5th, Gladys's car was seen leaving the neighborhood. It wasn't something she had mentioned to anyone. Gladys had told the police she hadn't left the house after 9 p.m. that evening, but the footage didn't lie. The car's headlights cut through the still night as it drove toward the outskirts of town, toward the woods. The detectives were cautious. They knew they had to approach this carefully. Rather than confront Gladys directly, they decided to investigate the area themselves. They drove out to the secluded woods, hoping that their instincts would lead them to something significant. The woods were quiet and isolated, the perfect place to bury a secret. The area Gladys had been seen driving to was known for its low traffic, a place where few would go without a reason. The detectives started searching, slowly moving through the brush. After about an hour, they found it. A shallow grave, dug hastily in the earth, the edges still jagged and uneven, as if the person who buried the bodies had been in a rush. It was far from an expert job. There were no smooth edges, no careful attention to detail. The earth had been disturbed in a way that screamed panic. The detectives unearthed the bodies of Jacob and Joseph, still wearing the clothes they had been reported missing in. Their eyes were wide open, their faces frozen in a grim expression. It was clear they had been drugged before their deaths. The autopsy later confirmed that they had both been poisoned. Sedatives and pesticide had been found in their systems. The cause of death was ruled as homicide. What had begun as a missing persons case was now a murder investigation. The news of the discovery hit like a bombshell. The entire town, once so sure of Gladys's innocence, was left in shock. How could this have happened? How could the woman they had all trusted, the woman they had called the pillar of the community, have done such a thing? The detectives knew that the case against Gladys was beginning to take shape, but there was one thing left to do: confront her. On July 3, 2023, Gladys was brought in for questioning. Detective Haynes, alongside his team, sat down with her in the interrogation room. The silence was thick with tension. Gladys sat across from them, her face pale and drawn. She still wore the mask of grief, but it was clear to the detectives that she was starting to crack. The confrontation was direct. They showed her the surveillance footage, the car, the route, the time. They asked her why she had gone to the woods that night, why she had never mentioned it to anyone. At first, Gladys denied everything. "I didn't do anything wrong," she said, her voice wavering. "I don't know what you're talking about. I love them. They were my family. I would never hurt them." But the evidence was undeniable. The footage, the forensic findings, the timeline, it all pointed to her. The detectives pressed her harder. "We found them, Mrs. Roberts," Detective Haynes said quietly. "We found Jacob and Joseph in the woods. We know you put them there." The room fell silent. Gladys's hands began to shake. Her carefully constructed facade was crumbling. "I didn't mean to," she whispered, her voice cracking. It happened. She paused, swallowing hard. "They tried to hurt me." The room fell silent again. Gladys's words hung in the air like an accusation. The detectives exchanged a glance, knowing that they were getting closer. "What do you mean?" Haynes asked, keeping his voice steady. Gladys's face twisted as she continued, her story growing more bizarre with every word. They tried to rape me," she said, her eyes wide with what appeared to be genuine fear. "They were drunk. The detectives didn't believe her. They knew the twins. They had interviewed neighbors, teachers, coaches, co-workers many times over the years. They had never shown any signs of aggression, let alone violence toward their grandmother. It was an absurd claim, a desperate attempt to deflect blame. Gladys's story fell apart quickly, leaving her with no choice but to admit what had really happened. Under pressure, she finally confessed. "I didn't know what else to do," she said, her voice low, almost inaudible. "I thought I could stop them from telling. I couldn't let them ruin everything, my life, my reputation, the church. I couldn't lose it all." The confession came in fragments, each more chilling than the last. Gladys had planned the murders, drugged the twins, and then buried them in the woods. She had done it all to protect herself, to protect the image of the woman everyone thought she was. The detectives had what they needed. Formal charges were filed for 2 counts of first-degree homicide, and the case was swiftly moved to trial. The community, once so supportive of Gladys, was now in disbelief. How could a woman who had raised her grandsons, who had been a model citizen for decades, commit such an act of brutality? On August 17, 2023, Gladys stood before a judge, facing the consequences of her actions. Her defense team tried to argue mental deterioration, claiming that years of trauma and the loss of her son had driven her to this point. But the prosecution was firm. They painted her actions as calculated, premeditated, and cruel. They focused on her manipulation of the twins, the way she had staged the crime scene, and the way she had used her family's trust to cover up her crimes. The courtroom was filled with tension as witnesses, including investigators and the medical examiner, testified about the evidence, the timeline, the substances found in the twins' bodies, and the autopsy results. Gladys's supporters were in the crowd, but their faces were pale, their eyes full of disbelief. A man who had been a childhood friend of Brian spoke, describing Gladys as a woman who could do no wrong. But others who had seen her more closely spoke of a woman who had been controlling, manipulative, and emotionally fragile. On September 4, 2023, the jury returned their verdict, guilty on both counts of homicide. The judge sentenced Gladys to 85 years in prison without the possibility of parole. The community was left stunned, struggling to reconcile the woman they had loved with the reality of what she had done. Months later, Gladys gave birth in prison to a child whose identity was sealed for safety. The baby was immediately placed under protective care by the state of Texas. The boy became the last surviving member of the Roberts family, a family destroyed by the woman who had once been their matriarch. The case of Gladys Roberts is not just a story about murder. It's a story about the crushing weight of shame, the dangers of living for reputation, and the catastrophic consequences of secrecy. For decades, Gladys had built her life on the foundation of redemption, proving to her community, and perhaps to herself, that she was more than the teenage mother who had been judged and dismissed. She had succeeded in many ways. She raised a son who became a good man. She took in her orphaned grandsons and gave them love, structure, and a future. She earned respect in a town that had once whispered her name in scorn. But beneath that respectability was a woman who never learned to forgive herself, who never allowed herself to be vulnerable, who equated love with control and acceptance with performance. When the unthinkable happened, when the boundaries she had spent a lifetime reinforcing collapsed in a moment of intoxication and blurred judgment, she could not face the truth. She could not bear the thought of being judged again, of losing the respect she had fought so hard to earn. And so, rather than confront the consequences, she chose to eliminate them. The weight of fear, pride, and secrecy drove her to commit an act that even she in her confession could barely comprehend. 2 young lives were lost, an innocent infant was separated for safety, and a community was left reeling from betrayal. Gladys Roberts' choice to protect her reputation, instead of confronting the truth, tore apart everything she once held dear. The case raises uncomfortable questions. How could a grandmother so widely respected choose such a path? If she feared exposure, should she have left the area or sought a lawful medical solution instead of resorting to violence? What safeguards can we put in place to help families confront shame before it turns into tragedy? These are questions that Pine Bluff, Texas, is still grappling with. The church where Gladys once sang in the choir held a memorial service for Jacob and Joseph, but many members could not bring themselves to attend. The house on Cedar Lane stands empty, a silent monument to a family that no longer exists. And in a prison somewhere in Texas, Gladys Roberts lives with the knowledge that in trying to save herself, she destroyed everything she ever loved. This is a chilling true story, a dark history of how shame, secrecy, and the desperate need for control can turn love into something monstrous. It's a reminder that the crimes we commit to protect our image often destroy us far more completely than the truth ever could. And it's a sobering lesson in the real crime of letting fear dictate our choices, even when those choices lead us into the darkest corners of the human heart. This has been an investigative documentary on the Roberts family tragedy. If you found this deep dive into criminal psychology and investigative work compelling, please like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for watching.